On one side, within the heart of Mesoamerica, stood Moctezuma II, the emperor of the Aztec Empire. His throne was made of the finest gold, and his empire, Tenochtitlan, glistened like a jewel, nestled on an island in the vast Lake Texcoco. Moctezuma ruled with absolute power, but also with a deep connection to the divine. He was not just a man, he was a god, chosen to lead his people by the will of the heavens. The Mexica people, as they called themselves, saw him as the earthly embodiment of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. He was the living manifestation of their faith, their strength, and their unshakable belief in their divine right to rule. Yet despite his immense power, despite his belief that the gods watched over him and his people, Moctezuma could not foresee the calamity that was about to befall him. How could he? The world he ruled, bound by tradition, ritual, and blood, was far removed from the tumultuous forces that brewed across the sea. And across that sea, in the distant lands of Europe, a man named Hernán Cortés was preparing to sail. Born into a lesser noble family, Cortés had little to his name, but a burning desire for glory. By 1502, the winds of opportunity had begun to blow in his favor. Word of new lands, lands full of treasure and riches beyond imagination, had begun to circulate across Spain. What could a man like Cortés do with nothing but a handful of soldiers and his ambition? He could conquer. He could take what was not his, seize the unknown, and carve his name into the history books for eternity. Moctezuma, on the other hand, had no reason to think that his divine empire, built on centuries of tradition and bloodshed, could ever fall. He had crushed rebellions, commanded vast armies, and offered thousands in sacrifice to the gods. His people believed him to be the son of the gods, and his rule was unquestioned. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The stage was set for the two men, the god king of the Aztecs and the ambitious Spanish conquistador, to meet, though they did not yet know it. They were bound by destiny, even though their paths could not have been more different. Moctezuma ruled from a city that was a marvel of engineering and artistry. The streets of Tenochtitlan were lined with temples that reached for the sky, bustling markets where goods from across the empire were exchanged, and grand palaces fit for an emperor. The Aztecs had mastered the art of warfare, engineering, and culture. They believed in their superiority, convinced that their gods had blessed them with the power to dominate the world. But their empire, however grand, was fragile, vulnerable to the tides of fate, just like any other. As Moctezuma sat in his grand palace, presiding over his kingdom with a confidence born of divine right, he could not have known that a storm was gathering on the horizon. Across the ocean, in the Iberian Peninsula, the winds had begun to whisper of new lands, lands full of riches, new worlds to conquer. A new dawn had broken in Spain, and the thirst for gold and glory was unquenchable. For Cortés, the decision had already been made. He would journey to the New World, seek his fortune, and bring back treasures that would make him a legend. His journey, like so many before him, would be one of violence and conquest. With only a few hundred men and the promise of untold wealth, Cortés would set sail across the Atlantic, bound for the land of the Aztecs. His ambition burned like a fire in his soul, and he cared little for the lives of those who stood in his way. He saw the Aztecs not as a civilization with rich traditions and customs, but as an obstacle, a people to be subjugated in the name of the Spanish crown. His eyes were fixed on gold, and nothing would stand in his way. When Cortés and his small band of men landed on the shores of what is now Mexico, they had no idea what awaited them. The journey across the ocean had been long, treacherous, and filled with hardship. But Cortés was undeterred. He had heard the rumors, Rumors of vast cities made of gold, of a people whose wealth could fill the coffers of Spain for centuries to come. The Aztecs had heard nothing of these men, of the ships that sailed from across the ocean, but soon they would know. And so, the first contact between the Aztecs and the Spanish occurred. The Mexica, standing on the shores of their empire, had never seen anything like the ships that Cortez sailed in on. The tall white sails must have seemed like something out of a dream, a vision that could only be described as divine. And yet, the people of the Aztec Empire, though astonished, were not afraid. The gods, they believed, had a plan. They had seen this before: strange omens, mysterious visitors from afar. They did not yet know that these men from the sea would bring with them more than just wonders and gold. They would bring destruction. Moctezuma, ever the cautious ruler, responded not with immediate action, but with hesitation. His advisors, wise men who had served him for years, were divided. Some believed the strangers were divine beings, sent by the gods. Others, more skeptical, thought them to be enemies. Moctezuma was unsure. His own priests and seers were divided. They told him that the gods had warned of the arrival of strange visitors, but their true meaning remained unclear. In the face of this uncertainty, Moctezuma chose to offer gifts: gold, fine cloth, and treasures, hoping to placate these visitors from the sea. It was an act of diplomacy, but it would prove to be his greatest mistake. The gifts, however, did not satisfy Cortez. For him, the gold was not a symbol of respect. It was a sign of weakness. In his mind, Moctezuma's gifts were not enough to stop him from claiming the riches of the Aztec Empire for himself. What began as an exchange of pleasantries would soon descend into violence. Cortez, despite being vastly outnumbered, had an unyielding confidence that bordered on madness. He did not see the Mexica as a people worthy of respect. He saw them as a people to be conquered. His men, too, were driven by ambition and the promise of riches. Their eyes gleamed not with awe, but with greed. As Cortez made his way deeper into the Aztec Empire, he began to see the cracks in Moctezuma's rule. The emperor, once revered as a god, was now a prisoner in his own palace. Cortez, with his cunning and ruthlessness, quickly realized that the key to victory was not in fighting an army of thousands, but in manipulating the divisions that already existed within the empire. The Aztecs, for all their might, were not invulnerable. Their vast empire, built on conquest and bloodshed, was fragile. Cortez would soon exploit these weaknesses, forming alliances with Moctezuma's enemies and turning them against the emperor. And then there was the moment that would define the entire conquest, the moment that sealed the fate of the Aztec Empire. Cortez, having gained control over Moctezuma, demanded that the emperor order his people to submit. With a few simple words, Cortez would bring the great Aztec Empire to its knees. The gods, it seemed, had abandoned Moctezuma. In the end, it was not the might of the Aztec army or the strength of their gods that brought about their fall, but the cunning of one man, Hernán Cortés. As Cortés marched on, the blood of the Aztecs flowed freely. The gods of Tenochtitlan had watched as their city fell, their people slaughtered, and their empire crumbled. The once great empire, with its magnificent temples and bustling markets, would soon be reduced to nothing more than ruins. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan would be replaced by the cold, calculated order of the Spanish conquerors. But as the smoke of battle rose over the city, one question remained. What does it mean when an empire falls? What happens to a people, to a culture, to a civilization, when their gods are no longer enough to protect them? What happens when the world that was once so full of life, of glory, of hope, is reduced to ashes? The fall of the Aztec Empire is not just a story of conquest, It is a story of loss, of the destruction of something beautiful, something eternal. The blood of brothers was spilled, and in its place, a new world was born. It is said that history is written by the victors, but in the case of the Aztecs, it was not just the victors who wrote it. The Mexica themselves left behind their own accounts, their own voices, traces of their civilization that still echo through time. And in those echoes, we find not just the story of conquest, but the story of a people who were once mighty, who believed in their gods, who believed in their destiny. And in the end, their destiny was taken from them. The world changed forever in 1521. The gods had watched in silence, and now the world bent to the shape of one man's imagination. The Mexica had made their desert and called it peace. From blood came order, from order, eternity. If you found yourself captivated by this story, captivated by the rise and fall of empires, don't forget to subscribe to Empires Historical for more deep dives into the greatest civilizations in history. Your support means everything to us and keeps the stories of the past alive. Join us, and let's continue our journey together through the annals of time. In the year 1519, the vast and complex world of the Aztecs was poised on the edge of an abyss. To those who lived within its boundaries, the empire was a living, breathing testament to their achievements. The Aztec civilization, one of the most sophisticated in the Americas, stood as a pinnacle of human ingenuity. Their capital city of Tenochtitlan was a marvel of engineering, a place where water flowed in aqueducts, gardens bloomed above the skyline, and towering pyramids reached towards the heavens. Beneath this grandeur lay the heart of their society, the unshakable belief in the divine right of the emperor and the fierce loyalty of the people. The Aztecs had built their empire upon blood, both the blood they shed in war and the blood they offered to the gods. It was a kingdom of warriors, where the strong ruled and the weak were crushed underfoot. Yet, for all their might, for all their triumphs, the empire was not immune to the forces of fate, the tides of destiny that would soon wash over them. In the shadow of this mighty empire stood Hernán Cortés, a man whose ambition burned brighter than any star in the night sky. Born to a lesser noble family, Cortés had always dreamed of greatness, of carving his name into the annals of history. And like so many men before him, his ambition led him to the shores of the New World. Spain, at the time, was consumed by the pursuit of riches, of glory, and of conquest. From the moment Cortés set foot on the land of the Aztecs, he understood that he was not merely a visitor in a foreign land. He was a predator, and the empire that sprawled before him would soon be his prey. But what could a mere handful of men do against a vast empire, an empire that stretched as far as the eye could see, an empire that was supported by a people who believed their emperor was the very embodiment of the gods? The answer, as history would reveal, lay not in the might of an army, nor in the strength of weapons, but in the power of perception. Cortés, like a master puppeteer, knew that perception could bend the will of an empire, that in the game of power, the mind was just as important a weapon as any sword or shield. He did not seek to conquer the Aztecs with brute force. He sought to conquer them with ideas, with illusions, and with manipulation. He didn't see the Aztecs as a people to be understood, but as an obstacle to be overcome. And for all their grandeur, for all their divine beliefs, the Aztecs were unprepared for the storm that Cortés was about to unleash. For the Mexica people, the arrival of the Spanish was both an omen and a mystery. In their rich mythological tradition, the arrival of strangers from across the sea was foretold as a moment of reckoning. Their priests had long whispered of the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, who was said to come from the east and bring with him a new age for the people of the sun. When Cortés and his men arrived on the shores of the Aztec Empire, it was impossible for the Mexica to immediately discern whether they were witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy or the arrival of a new threat. The Spaniards were unlike anything they had ever seen. Pale-skinned, bearded men with strange weapons and ships that seemed to have risen from the very ocean itself. But the greatest mystery lay in their appearance, for the Aztecs saw in Cortés a man who was both familiar and foreign. To Moctezuma, the emperor, the Spaniards were a puzzle. Could they be the divine beings foretold by his priests? Or were they merely men, no different from the countless conquerors who had come before them? In the grand palace of Moctezuma, amidst the incense-filled air and the murmurs of the royal court, uncertainty reigned. The emperor, though powerful and revered, found himself faced with a dilemma unlike any other. His rule had been unchallenged for years, his empire flourishing with riches from far and wide. Yet now, faced with these strange men from across the sea, he could not help but feel a deep unease. The gods had spoken, and yet the message they conveyed was cryptic at best. Was this a test? A moment of divine judgment? Or had the winds of fate finally begun to shift against him? For Moctezuma, this was not merely a question of strategy or military might. It was a question of identity. His entire life, his power, and the very foundation of his rule had been built upon the belief that he was chosen by the gods, that his reign was divinely ordained. To challenge that belief would be to question the very essence of his existence, to risk the unraveling of everything he had worked to build. And yet, the arrival of Cortés posed a threat unlike any he had faced before. If the Spaniards were truly gods, then Moctezuma's fate had already been sealed. If they were not, then he risked angering the gods and facing the consequences. In his wisdom, or perhaps in his fear, Moctezuma chose a path of diplomacy. Rather than immediately taking up arms, he sent emissaries to Cortés, bearing gifts of gold, fine feathers, and precious stones. These were not simply offerings. They were symbols of the Aztec Empire's grandeur, tokens of their belief in the divine nature of their ruler. The gifts were meant to impress, to show Cortés that the Aztecs were not a people to be taken lightly. But what Moctezuma did not realize was that these gifts, meant to pacify, would only further fuel Cortés's ambition. Cortés was not moved by the gold and jewels. He had come not for treasures alone, but for something greater: glory, power, and dominion over a land that seemed ripe for the taking. The gifts were, in his eyes, signs of weakness, a signal that Moctezuma and his people had underestimated him. He saw them not as an offering of peace, but as a sign that the Aztecs were afraid, that they feared what the Spaniards could bring. And so, with the arrogance of a man who had already decided his victory, Cortés pushed further into the heart of the Aztec Empire. But the arrival of Cortés was not just a moment of external conflict. It was a moment of internal unraveling for the Aztecs. Moctezuma's decision to send gifts was not merely an act of diplomacy. It was an admission of his own uncertainty. The once great emperor, who had commanded armies and built empires, now found himself questioning the very foundation of his rule. Was he truly the chosen one? Was his empire truly invincible? And, most tragically, Moctezuma began to realize that the gods he had served all his life may have turned their eyes away from him. As his people saw their emperor, once a god in their eyes, falter in the face of the Spanish threat, the very fabric of their society began to tear apart. The empire that had once been unified by its belief in its emperor now faced a crisis of faith. Cortés, ever the opportunist, capitalized on this crisis. He did not come to Tenochtitlan merely to conquer. He came to destroy the very idea that the Aztecs had built their world upon. the idea of divine rule, of gods among men. Through cunning and manipulation, Cortés sowed division within the ranks of the Mexica, using their own doubts against them. The emperor's once unquestioned authority began to crumble, and with it, the empire itself began to falter. This, then, was the true tragedy of the Aztec Empire, not the loss of life, nor the conquest of Tenochtitlan, but the death of a belief system. The Mexica, who had once seen themselves as chosen by the gods, now saw their gods abandon them. The belief in the divine right of Moctezuma, the very foundation of their civilization, was shattered. The empire that had been built upon blood and faith was now crumbling under the weight of uncertainty, of doubt, and of the realization that their gods might not be as invincible as they had once believed. And so, as the blood of the Aztecs flowed in the streets of Tenochtitlan, and as their once great city was laid to waste, one question echoed through the ruins. What is left when an empire falls, when a civilization's belief in its divine right to rule is torn asunder? What remains when the gods have abandoned you, when the world you built with sweat, blood, and sacrifice crumbles beneath your feet? In the end, the answer is both simple and tragic. Nothing. Nothing but the ruins of what once was, and the echoes of a people who believed their fate was written in the stars. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not just the fall of a kingdom, it was the fall of a vision, a belief in divine order, a dream that was shattered by the cold, ruthless march of history. It is said that every empire, no matter how grand, falls at the hands of fate, shaped by both human ambition and the unforeseen. The story of the Aztecs, perhaps one of the most powerful empires to ever grace the earth, is no different. In the early 16th century, at the height of their glory, they ruled over an empire that stretched from the highland valleys of Mexico to the shores of the Pacific. They had built magnificent cities, with Tenochtitlan standing as a crown jewel among them, a city so vast and magnificent that it made even the mighty kings of Europe tremble at its splendor. But like all great civilizations, the Aztec Empire had a flaw. It was one that lay beneath the surface of their complex society, an insatiable hunger for conquest. The Mexica, as they were known to themselves, saw their empire as one of divine purpose. Their gods demanded tribute, the lifeblood of their rituals and warfare. Their king, Moctezuma II, had come to the throne at a time when the empire seemed destined for even greater glory. Little did he know, however, that this very ambition would bring his downfall. Moctezuma's reign was not one of peaceful consolidation, but of relentless expansion. He waged wars to subjugate neighboring tribes, each victory bringing more land, more captives for sacrifice, and more tribute for the gods. But the Aztecs were not just conquerors of men, they were also masters of their environment. Tenochtitlan, the heart of their empire, was an awe-inspiring city built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, a place that seemed to float on water. Its vast canals, grand temples, and towering pyramids gave it a surreal beauty, a testament to the Mexica's incredible engineering and artistry. The Great Pyramid of Templo Mayor, dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, loomed above the city, a constant reminder of the divine presence that governed every aspect of their lives. Yet despite the splendor, there was a growing sense of unease. The empire was not invulnerable. As the Aztecs expanded, they alienated many of their neighbors, tribes that, although subjugated, harbored resentment and hatred for their rulers. The Tlaxcalans, a fierce and independent people, were among these enemies. For years, the Aztecs had waged war against them in a series of bloody conflicts known as the Flower Wars. These wars, fought not just for land but for captives to be sacrificed, had hardened the Tlaxcalans into a people who hated the Mexica with a passion. They awaited their moment, the chance to rid themselves of their oppressors once and for all. But fate has a way of intervening in the most unexpected of manners. In the year 1519, across the vast Atlantic Ocean, a storm of destiny was gathering. In Spain, the winds of change were stirring. The age of exploration, a time when the European world was eager to expand its reach across the globe, had already begun to shape the course of history. Columbus had discovered the New World in 1492, but the true nature of what lay beyond the seas had remained a mystery. That is, until a man named Amerigo Vespucci suggested that the lands discovered by Columbus were not the edge of Asia, as many had believed, but rather a completely new continent, separate from the known world. This revelation sparked a frenzy of exploration across Europe, as nations began to send expeditions to claim their share of the mysterious lands to the west. One of these explorers was Hernán Cortés, a man born into a minor noble family in Spain. His early life was marked by restlessness and ambition. At the age of 19, he left Spain for the New World, seeking wealth and adventure. Cortés was a man of ambition, driven by a desire for glory and riches, but also by a burning curiosity about the unknown. He traveled to Hispaniola, where he worked as a notary, learning the ways of colonial administration and law. But his heart was not content. He was drawn to the land of opportunities, the land that Vespucci and others spoke of, where gold and riches awaited. In 1519, Cortés arrived in Cuba, a Spanish colony, but his mind was fixed on something greater. Rumors were spreading of a vast empire in the land of the Mexica, where untold treasures lay hidden in the heart of their magnificent city. Cortés, sensing an opportunity, made up his mind to venture to Mexico and discover the truth for himself. His motives were clear: riches, glory, and perhaps, in the quiet recesses of his mind, the desire to carve his name into the annals of history. But as he made plans to leave, an unexpected turn of events took place. Diego Arwarides Crumdiguedoles, the governor of Cuba, had granted Cortés permission to explore the mainland, but only under his supervision. Yet Cortés, never one to be bound by the rules, defied Velázquez's orders. He secretly gathered a small army of soldiers and set sail from the port of Santiago in 1519, determined to find his own path to power. Cortés's journey was not without hardship. The journey across the sea to the Mexican coast was grueling. The ships were cramped, the air was thick with the stench of sweat and salt, and the men suffered from seasickness and exhaustion. Yet, despite the challenges, Cortés pressed on, determined to reach the fabled lands of the Mexica. After a grueling voyage, Cortés and his men finally arrived on the shores of what is now modern-day Mexico. They landed on the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, where they encountered the first indigenous people of the region. These people, the Maya, had their own rich history and culture, but they were soon overshadowed by the arrival of the Spaniards. Cortés and his men, though vastly outnumbered, were armed with guns, steel armor, and horses, technological advantages that would give them an edge over the indigenous peoples. The Spanish made their way inland, where they encountered various tribes, some of which submitted peacefully, while others resisted. But it was not until they reached the coast of the Gulf of Mexico that they received their first glimpse of the Mexica, and with them, the empire that would change the course of history. On the outskirts of Tenochtitlan, Cortés encountered emissaries from Moctezuma II, the Aztec Emperor. The Mexica were initially intrigued by the newcomers, and the sight of the strange ships and the men who came with them filled the Aztec people with a mixture of awe and fear. It was said that some of the Aztecs believed the Spanish to be gods, particularly when they witnessed their strange armor, horses, and firearms. Moctezuma himself, however, was cautious. He had heard rumors of the Europeans and their strange ways. The emissaries from Moctezuma offered gifts of gold and textiles to Cortez, signaling that the Mexica were eager to establish peaceful relations, but also uncertain of what these newcomers wanted. Cortez, however, saw this as a moment of opportunity. He knew that Moctezuma's empire was powerful, but it was also fraught with internal divisions. The Mexica had subjugated many neighboring tribes, and Cortez recognized that these enemies might prove to be valuable allies. He began to carefully cultivate relationships with these tribes, including the Tlaxcalans, who had long resisted the rule of the Mexica. These tribes, united in their hatred of the Aztecs, would become essential to Cortez's strategy. As Cortez continued his journey toward Tenochtitlan, he and his men were met with resistance from some of the Mexica, but also with surprising signs of cooperation. The sight of Moctezuma's emissaries, bearing gifts and messages of peace, seemed to give Cortez the impression that the Mexica were more vulnerable than he had first thought. The emperor's hesitation was a crack in the foundation of the empire that Cortez would soon exploit. As Cortez and his men approached Tenochtitlan, the atmosphere thickened with an undeniable sense of foreboding. The Mexica capital loomed before them like a mythical city of gods, surrounded by the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco. There, on the island, was the heartbeat of an empire that had long been untouchable. Yet, despite its formidable power, there was something fragile about it, something that Cortez instinctively understood. The empire was built on a house of cards, and he was about to blow the winds that would bring it all crashing down. The Mexica capital was a wonder of the world. Its towering pyramids, its majestic temples, its vast markets, teeming with traders from distant lands, and its sophisticated system of canals, all made Tenochtitlan a marvel of human achievement. Yet, beneath its glittering surface, there were cracks that spoke of tension and fear. Moctezuma Sao, though powerful, was a ruler gripped by uncertainty. The emperor had been receiving omens, strange signs that seemed to foretell the arrival of foreigners who would bring ruin to his people. He had seen strange visions in the night, and there was an ancient prophecy among the Mexica that spoke of the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, who was said to return from the east and overthrow the empire. Moctezuma's fear of this prophecy was palpable, and he began to question whether these foreigners, these strange men in armor and steel, might indeed be the fulfillment of this ancient prediction. Despite these doubts, the emperor, driven by a combination of fear and pragmatism, chose not to engage in open conflict with Cortez and his men. Instead, he opted for a more diplomatic approach, hoping to placate the invaders with gifts of gold and other treasures. He sent emissaries with lavish offerings, including fine jewelry, precious stones, and even feathers from the rare Quetzal bird, all in an attempt to demonstrate the wealth and splendor of his empire. But Cortez, ever the opportunist, saw beyond the gifts. He recognized that Moctezuma's desire for peace was rooted in something deeper, an internal struggle within the Aztec leadership, one that exposed the empire's vulnerability. Moctezuma's hesitancy, his attempts to placate the Spaniards with wealth and kindness, were not signs of strength, but of fear. Cortez seized on this, knowing that he could manipulate these tensions to his advantage. At the same time, the Spanish explorer had already begun to form alliances with various indigenous groups who had long suffered under Aztec rule. The Tlaxcalans, bitter enemies of the Mexica, were the first to join Cortez's cause. Their hatred for the Aztecs, who had long oppressed them, fueled their desire for revenge. Under the banner of a shared enemy, the Tlaxcalans, along with other subjugated tribes, rallied to the side of Cortez. These alliances would prove to be crucial in the coming days. as they provided the Spanish with the manpower and local knowledge needed to navigate the intricacies of Aztec society and military tactics. When Cortés finally arrived at the gates of Tenochtitlan, he was greeted with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The Mexica people, who had long been taught to revere their gods as powerful and unyielding, saw the Spaniards as beings from another world. They marveled at the horses, at the shimmering armor, and at the cannons that roared with thunder. Many, including Moctezuma, believed that the Spanish were the descendants of Quetzalcoatl, returned at last to fulfill the prophecy. It was said that when Cortés first entered the city, Moctezuma himself, in a mixture of reverence and fear, welcomed the invaders with open arms, presenting them with a golden throne. The emperor, in his uncertainty, saw no reason to resist them. But it was this very gesture of submission that marked the beginning of the end. Moctezuma invited Cortés into the heart of his capital, a decision that would prove to be his undoing. In his mind, he hoped that the foreigners would prove to be temporary visitors, that their hunger for riches would soon be sated. But Cortés, as any conqueror would, had other plans. He recognized that the time to strike had come, and his strategy was one of calculated subversion. The Spaniards were not merely visitors, they were invaders, intent on dismantling the very foundation of the Aztec Empire. The night that Cortés and Moctezuma met in the heart of Tenochtitlan was a fateful one. As the two men stood in the shadow of the great pyramid of Templo Mayor, the air was thick with the tension of an empire on the brink of destruction. Cortés, who had carefully studied the workings of the Aztec court and its politics, realized that Moctezuma's authority was brittle, held together by fragile alliances and the fear of rebellion. In the eyes of the emperor, Cortés was not just a man. He was a symbol of the god Quetzalcoatl, the bringer of change, the harbinger of a new order. For days, the Spaniards were treated with hospitality, as Moctezuma sought to keep them appeased. But the power dynamic was shifting. Cortés had already set his sights on the heart of the empire. The emperor's willingness to bow before the invaders emboldened Cortés. The more the Spanish soldiers observed the grandeur of Tenochtitlan, the more they understood its weaknesses, its internal divisions, its vulnerable leadership, and the resentful tribes waiting for an opportunity to rise against their oppressors. As Cortés solidified his alliances with the Tlaxcalans and other tribes, he began to carefully build his forces. The Spaniards, though small in number compared to the Mexica, had a decisive edge in their weapons, guns, cannons, and steel swords, and their ability to strike quickly and decisively. The Aztecs, by contrast, were still largely dependent on traditional weapons like obsidian-bladed swords and wooden shields. The advantage was with the invaders, and they knew it. The battle for Tenochtitlan was not won in a single day. It would take time, cunning, and an unyielding will to bend the world to their ambitions. But with each passing day, as the Spanish forces grew stronger and the Mexica's internal rifts deepened, the inevitable began to take shape. The empire that had been built on the blood of captives and the sacrifices to the gods was now crumbling, not from the might of an outside force, but from the treachery within and the weight of its own grandiosity. Cortés, having infiltrated the very heart of the Aztec Empire, was ready to strike the final blow. Moctezuma, caught between his divine beliefs and his earthly fears, would soon find that his once great empire was no match for the winds of fate and the fire of ambition that raged within the heart of Hernán Cortés. The vastness of history, like a restless river, is shaped by the clash of forces that once seemed immovable, only to be undone by the relentless tides of time. In the world of the Aztecs, there existed a moment, a singular, fragile moment, when everything would pivot. It was a time when the empire that once stretched its fingers to the edges of Mesoamerica, poised for an eternity of dominance, would instead tumble into dust and silence. The emperor Moctezuma stood at the cusp of greatness, yet his kingdom was on the verge of collapse. His actions, his decisions, and the weight of fate were about to converge. In the year 1519, when the Spanish arrived at the edge of Tenochtitlan, the gleaming city set upon the great expanse of Lake Texcoco, nothing in the history of the world had ever prepared the Mexica for what would unfold. The European invaders, though seemingly insignificant in number and strength compared to the mighty Aztec Empire, brought with them an unseen weapon, the very idea of a new world. Moctezuma, despite the counsel of his closest advisors, struggled to comprehend the significance of their arrival. He had watched the omens of his people, the legends, the prophecies, the mysterious signs that had spoken of the end of his reign. The arrival of the white men, the bearded strangers whose ships appeared like mountains on the horizon, stirred a deep, unsettling fear within him. It was said that Moctezuma, in his wealth and might, ruled over more than just an empire. He ruled the very fabric of life for the Mexica, their beliefs, their rituals, their hearts. But deep inside, beneath the robes of power, Moctezuma was haunted. A king whose every decision was steeped in spiritual meaning, his every move guided by the sacred laws of the gods, found himself torn by a fear that perhaps the gods had begun to abandon him. Moctezuma had grown up under the burden of prophecy, a burden that bore down on him like the weight of the earth. His reign, in many ways, was a fulfillment of an ancient vision, a promise from the gods that the Mexica would flourish. Their empire would last for eternity. But as the years passed and the great city of Tenochtitlan stood as the jewel of Mesoamerica, the cracks began to show. The empire was not immune to the forces that sought to undermine it. Rebellions brewed in the corners of his kingdom. Whispers of dissatisfaction spread like wildfire among his people. The blood of his enemies, spilled in sacred rites of sacrifice, was no longer enough to sustain the fragile peace that had been forged. It was under these circumstances that the arrival of Hernán Cortés, the Spanish conquistador, would reshape the future of the Aztec Empire. As the Spanish soldiers marched through the dense forests toward Tenochtitlan, Cortés did not only bring weapons, he brought a vision that could not be ignored. The gods of the Mexica had long spoken of the return of a great force, and in Cortés, they saw a glimpse of what was to come. A godlike figure, dressed in armor, whose face was as pale as the moonlight that shone over the sacred temples of Tenochtitlan. But what the Aztecs did not know, what Moctezuma could not yet fathom, was that the true weapon the Spanish wielded was not just their metal, but the fragile ego of a ruler who had too long sat at the top of a world built on fear and blood. From the first moment of contact, the confrontation between Cortés and Moctezuma would echo through the chambers of time, rippling out with consequences that neither man could have predicted. Moctezuma, the emperor, the living embodiment of the Mexica gods on earth, was faced with a dilemma he had never known: how to respond to the overwhelming force of a man who did not speak his language, who did not honor the sacred rites, and yet somehow had the power to destroy his empire with a single stroke. The relationship between these two men would become a dance of deference and dread. Cortés, ever the strategist, understood that to defeat Moctezuma, he did not need to simply overcome the Aztec warriors in battle. No. What he needed was to fracture the very foundation of Mexica society, to sow doubt, to destabilize the very concept of divine rule that had been the cornerstone of Moctezuma's power. He would play on the fears and beliefs of the Mexican people, understanding that their emperor was not just a man, but a divine figure whose word was law, whose will was the will of the gods. If he could break Moctezuma's sense of certainty, he could break the empire. Cortés did not attempt to rush to Tenochtitlan. He moved with deliberate purpose, with calculated steps, knowing that the empire would falter under the weight of uncertainty. When he first made contact with the Aztecs, he was not met with the battle cries of warriors, but the gaze of a ruler who feared the truth of his own vulnerability. Moctezuma, in his wisdom and arrogance, believed that he could placate the Spanish with gifts, with offerings of gold and peace. But peace was a luxury that no longer existed in the world that Cortés had entered. As the Spanish entered the city, the Mexica saw their emperor not as a man, but as a god incarnate. They revered him, they worshipped him, and yet, in the very moment when their king had the greatest power, he was at his weakest. Cortés, who had no army of note, no weapons of mass destruction, was able to manipulate the gods themselves. He used Moctezuma's own divine status against him, forcing the emperor to bend to his will, to admit that the gods had not sent him to protect the empire, but to destroy it. The Aztec court, once a sanctuary of opulence and ceremonial grandeur, became the stage for a battle of wills. Moctezuma's downfall began not with the clash of swords, but with the subtle erosion of his divine image. Cortés knew that by taking Moctezuma hostage, by chaining him, by removing his authority in front of his people, he could unravel the very fabric of Mexica society. What followed was not an invasion, but a slow, methodical assassination of the soul of the Aztec Empire. The strength of Moctezuma, the very thing that had held his empire together, was now his greatest weakness. The Mexica people, whose belief in their emperor's divinity had been unshakable, were now left questioning their own gods. The once indomitable Moctezuma, who had commanded the blood of his enemies to be spilled on the stone steps of the temples, could not command the loyalty of his own people. They had watched as he was humiliated, stripped of his power and dignity. It was no longer the blood of enemies that would flow, but the blood of his own people. In the halls of Tenochtitlan, where the emperor had once sat in judgment, where the gods themselves had been invoked to bless the Mexica, there was now only silence. And as that silence deepened, so too did the echoes of a dying empire. Cortés, the Spanish conqueror, understood this truth, that no empire could last if its foundation was built on fear, if its people did not believe in the strength of their rulers. And Moctezuma, in the end, understood that he was but a man. As the months wore on, the weight of failure hung heavy in the air. Cortés, once an outsider, now held sway over the heart of the empire. The Mexica had been defeated not by the edge of a sword, but by the fragility of the belief that their empire could not fall. The emperor's throne, once an object of awe, became a relic of a time long past. And as the final days of Tenochtitlan unfolded, it became clear. The age of the Aztec Empire was at its end. The sun that had once risen with the blood of sacrifices now set in shadow, eclipsed by the arrival of those who would forever change the course of history. What followed was the fall of a civilization, not just of stone and blood, but of belief, of dreams. Tenochtitlan, the jewel of Mesoamerica, would crumble, its temples and pyramids reduced to rubble. The lakes would dry, and the people who had once worshipped the sun and the moon would be forced to bow before a new set of gods, the gods of Spain. But as the city fell, as the final days of the Aztec Empire were written in the blood of warriors and the cries of the vanquished, there was an eerie beauty to the destruction. For in the ashes of Tenochtitlan, a new world was being born. And though the Mexica gods had been silenced, their story, their triumphs, and their fall would echo through the corridors of time, a reminder of the fragility of empire and the fleeting nature of all things great. The world had bent, and the shape it now took was one of darkness and light, of power and submission. From the ruins, a new order would rise, forever marked by the blood of the past. Tenochtitlan, once the pinnacle of human achievement, was doomed long before the first stone fell. It was a civilization built on the divine, its foundations rooted in the belief that the gods had chosen the Mexica as their people to rule the earth with an eternal authority. But like the gods themselves, this vision too was fleeting. The city, encircled by the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco, stood as a testament to the might of human imagination, an empire poised on the precipice of eternity, only to be undone by the forces it could neither see nor understand. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, where the sacred met the mundane, the Mexica held a vision of grandeur so perfect that it seemed unbreakable. Their gods, Quetzalcoatl, Tezcatlipoca, Huitzilopochtli, were not distant beings but active forces, breathing life into every aspect of the empire. Their priests, draped in the blood-red hues of sacrifice, performed rituals that kept the cosmic balance in place. The Mexica believed they were the caretakers of the world, that their sacrifices, dripping with the blood of their enemies, were essential to the survival of the sun, to the very pulse of the universe itself. But what happens when a civilization so entrenched in divine purpose meets a force that does not bend to the will of the gods? What happens when something, or someone, arrives that challenges not just the empire's military might, but the very foundation of their belief? The arrival of the Spanish in 1519 was not simply an invasion of men, weapons, and disease. To the Mexica, it was the arrival of gods. Hernán Cortés, the leader of the Spanish conquistadors, was believed to be the return of the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, who had once promised to return to bring salvation or destruction. Moctezuma, the emperor of the Mexica, in a fatal miscalculation, greeted the Spaniards with open arms, offering them gifts and hospitality. He believed that their arrival was foretold, that it was the fulfillment of the prophecy, and that the divine had brought them to the empire's doorstep. In this first moment of contact, the fate of the Mexica was sealed, not by the might of the Spanish, but by the Mexica's own vision of the world. The Mexica had woven themselves into the fabric of the universe in such a way that the very structure of their empire rested upon the belief in their divine mandate. When Cortés appeared, their worldview crumbled in an instant. They could not reconcile the arrival of the Spaniards with their sacred understanding of the world. This divine blindness did not come out of arrogance, but rather from an unwavering faith in their gods' protection. They had built an empire for centuries, one where the gods were present in every stone, every structure, every sacrificial blade. They believed that nothing could topple their empire, except, perhaps, the gods themselves. And in their eyes, these strange men, dressed in armor, had to be gods. They were too powerful, too foreign, too incomprehensible to be anything else. But faith alone cannot hold back the forces of history. The gods of the Mexica did not descend from the heavens to fight the Spanish. They did not intervene in the way the Mexica had hoped. The Spaniards, with their foreign diseases, their steel weapons, and their ruthless pursuit of power, laid waste to the Mexica's civilization. In the span of a few years, Tenochtitlan was brought to its knees, its temples shattered, its warriors slaughtered, its people enslaved. The once great city, which had flourished for centuries, was reduced to rubble, a mere shadow of its former glory. The fall of Tenochtitlan is not just the fall of a city, it is the fall of a vision, the destruction of a worldview. For the Mexica, their empire was built on the idea that they were the center of the universe, chosen by the gods to maintain cosmic order. The Spaniards did not simply conquer them with their weapons. They conquered them with a new vision of the world. They imposed their faith, their ideals, their sense of right and wrong. In doing so, they shattered the Mexica's understanding of their place in the cosmos. The Mexica, despite their fierce warriors and their awe-inspiring cities, were powerless in the face of this new belief. They could not fight it with the same force that they used in battle. No army could stand against an idea whose time had come. The gods of the Mexica, who had once walked the earth with their people, had turned their gaze elsewhere. And in their absence, the Mexica were left vulnerable to the forces that they could neither comprehend nor resist. The downfall of Tenochtitlan is a reminder of the fragility of empires, of the thin thread that holds civilizations together. For all their grandeur, for all their achievements, the Mexica were ultimately undone, not by the strength of their enemies, but by the collapse of their belief. The very thing that had given them power, their faith in their gods, became their downfall. As the ruins of Tenochtitlan were buried beneath the feet of the Spanish conquerors, the Mexica's divine order was no more. The blood that had once flowed freely in the sacred rituals of sacrifice now stained the streets, not as an offering to the gods, but as the price of an empire's fall. The once great city, with its soaring temples and bustling markets, lay silent, a memory of what had been. The Mexica had built something magnificent, something that seemed eternal, but in the end, it was swept away by the tide of history, as all empires eventually are. But even in the fall of Tenochtitlan, there is beauty. There is a deep, mournful beauty in the way the Mexica fought for their beliefs, in the way they resisted the inevitable even when the end was clear. There is a tragic nobility in the way they held fast to their vision of the world, even when that vision was ultimately destroyed. The Mexica may have fallen, but their story lives on, not just in the ruins of their cities, but in the lessons that they leave behind. The Mexica's story is a story of rise and fall, of greatness and ruin. It is a reminder of the power of belief, of the strength it can give a people, but also of the dangers of placing too much faith in something that is beyond human control. The Mexica's belief in their divine mandate allowed them to build an empire that was unmatched in its grandeur. But in the end, it was their belief in their gods, their unquestioning faith in their divine right to rule, that brought about their destruction. As the dust settles on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, we are left with a profound question. What is the price of greatness? The Mexica paid it with their lives, with their empire, and with their very understanding of the world. And yet, even in their destruction, there is a reminder of what it means to dream, to build, and to believe. In the end, the fall of Tenochtitlan is not that even the gods are not immune to the ravages of time. It is this realization, this epiphany, that rings through the ages. The Mexica's downfall was not simply a matter of conquest, but of hubris, a belief that their divine right to rule could never be questioned. The gods they had so long revered turned a blind eye to their cries, leaving them to face their fate alone. The Spanish, with their foreign gods, their strange ways, and their unyielding pursuit of empire, shattered the Mexica's worldview with the cold force of reality. The once imposing temples of Tenochtitlan, which had risen to the heavens as symbols of divine power, now lay in ruins, their stones crushed beneath the boots of the conquerors. The sacred rituals that had once sustained the empire were silenced, their significance lost in the clamor of foreign voices and new beliefs. And in the silence that followed, the Mexica realized the true cost of their faith. The gods they had worshipped for centuries, who had once walked the earth with them, had deserted them at their hour of need. Their once glorious city, filled with life and promise, was now a desolate wasteland. But even in the face of this ruin, the Mexica's story endures, a cautionary tale for all who dare to believe in the permanence of power, the infallibility of faith, and the certainty of divine favor. For in the end, the fall of Tenochtitlan teaches us that no civilization, no matter how mighty, is invincible. No empire, no matter how grand, is immune to the ravages of time. The gods may fade, the cities may crumble, but the lessons of the Mexica live on. And as we look upon the ruins of Tenochtitlan, we are reminded that greatness is fragile, that belief is powerful, but ultimately it is time that claims all things. The fall of the Aztec Empire remains one of the most significant and dramatic events in history, symbolizing the clash of two vastly different civilizations, the advanced, culturally rich world of the Aztecs and the ruthless imperial ambitions of the Spanish conquistadors. It is a story not just of military conquest, but of a clash of ideologies, worldviews, and humanity itself. At its height, the Aztec Empire ruled much of what is now Mexico, boasting a powerful military, a vast network of alliances, and a thriving economy. Yet, despite its strengths, the empire fell to foreign invaders in the span of just 2 years, leaving behind an enduring legacy that still shapes the culture of the Americas today. The story of the Aztec Empire's downfall begins in 1519, when Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador, arrived on the eastern shores of what is now Mexico. He came to the New World seeking riches, glory, and a place in history. What he did not anticipate was the power of the Aztec civilization, nor the complexity of its internal and external challenges. Upon landing, Cortés quickly made alliances with the indigenous people who were oppressed by the Aztec rulers. These people, such as the Tlaxcalans, harbored a deep resentment toward the Aztec overlords and saw the Spanish as potential liberators. Meanwhile, the Aztec Emperor, Moctezuma II, was faced with an existential crisis. Moctezuma was a ruler of great prestige, often regarded as a godlike figure by his people. He presided over the sprawling capital of Tenochtitlan, a city that seemed to defy imagination, situated on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. The city was an engineering marvel, with its intricate canals, floating gardens, and grand temples dedicated to the Aztec gods. Yet, despite the grandeur of the empire, Moctezuma was caught in a dilemma. Rumors and omens had foretold the arrival of strange, godlike beings from across the ocean. When Cortés and his men arrived, Moctezuma mistakenly believed that they were the fulfillment of this prophecy, the return of the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl. This misconception would have dire consequences. Cortés, ever the opportunist, seized upon this belief to his advantage. He demanded lavish gifts from Moctezuma, and the Aztec emperor, perhaps out of fear or a desire to maintain peace, complied. The emperor invited Cortés into the heart of his empire, but what started as a diplomatic mission soon turned into a struggle for control. The Spanish, though initially welcomed with open arms, were not interested in mere diplomacy. They sought conquest, and they found an eager ally in the indigenous groups who sought revenge against their Aztec oppressors. In the early months, the Aztec Empire seemed invulnerable. The Aztec warriors were among the fiercest fighters in the Americas, and their military prowess had kept them at the top of the region's political hierarchy for centuries. However, Cortés had a hidden weapon that the Aztecs could not anticipate: firearms and horses. These technologies, along with the tactical brilliance of the conquistadors, gave them an edge in battle. Yet, what proved even more effective than the Spanish weaponry was the spread of diseases like smallpox. Unseen and unnoticed, the Europeans carried these diseases with them, and within months, the Aztec population began to dwindle as smallpox ravaged their numbers. Despite this, Moctezuma and the Aztecs did not immediately retreat. Cortés was clever in exploiting divisions within the empire, leveraging alliances with the Tlaxcalans and other indigenous groups. The once feared Aztec warriors found themselves fighting not just the Spanish, but also an uprising within their own people. The emperor's decision to continue to negotiate with the Spaniards, to keep the peace, was seen as a weakness by many of his people, undermining his authority. Meanwhile, Cortés had begun to establish a foothold in the region, and his ambition was clear. He saw the Aztecs as an obstacle and their riches as his destiny. In 1520, the situation took a dramatic turn. Moctezuma was taken captive by the Spanish after an ill-conceived attempt to pacify the invaders. During his imprisonment, the power of the Aztec Empire started to crumble. The people of Tenochtitlan, enraged by their emperor's captivity, revolted against the Spanish and their allies. The Spanish were forced to retreat in what became known as La Noche Triste, or the Sad Night. This was a temporary victory for the Aztecs, but it was only fleeting. Cortés was not done, and his forces were bolstered by more indigenous allies, as well as reinforcements from Spain. The Spanish returned to Tenochtitlan in 1521 with a larger army and a new strategy, a siege. Cortés laid siege to the city, cutting off supplies and starving the inhabitants. The people of Tenochtitlan, already weakened by disease, were further decimated. The siege was brutal and prolonged. The once great city, a symbol of Aztec power, was now a prison. Cortés surrounded the city and systematically destroyed the aqueducts and bridges that supplied it with water. The people of Tenochtitlan were left with little to sustain them, and their resistance began to crumble. But it was the smallpox epidemic that truly sealed the Aztecs' fate. The disease spread rapidly, killing not only the soldiers and warriors of the empire, but also civilians, including many of the most prominent leaders. The loss of life was staggering, and the virus left the survivors weak and disorganized. The empire that had once boasted a powerful army, a sophisticated society, and a thriving culture was now a shadow of its former self. The final blow came on August 13, 1521. After months of siege, the Spanish forces, alongside their indigenous allies, finally captured Tenochtitlan. The city was reduced to ruins, its grand temples shattered, its once beautiful buildings crumbling into dust. Cortés and his men emerged victorious, and Moctezuma's empire was no more. The emperor, who had been imprisoned by the Spanish, died in mysterious circumstances. Some accounts claim that he was killed by his own people, angry at his failure to protect them. Others suggest that he may have died at the hands of the Spaniards. Regardless of the manner of his death, Moctezuma's passing symbolized the end of the Aztec Empire. In the aftermath of the conquest, the Spanish began to rebuild Tenochtitlan, now known as Mexico City, on top of the ruins. The destruction of the Aztec Empire marked the beginning of the Spanish colonial era in the Americas. The once proud Aztec civilization, with its vibrant culture, advanced agricultural systems, and grandiose monuments, was replaced by the foreign institutions of Spain. The indigenous people of Mexico, many of whom had been oppressed by the Aztecs themselves, now found themselves under the rule of a new foreign power. Yet, despite the fall of their empire, the legacy of the Aztec people endures. Their contributions to art, science, and agriculture continue to influence the world today. The fall of the Aztec Empire serves as a cautionary tale of the fragility of even the most powerful empires, and of the dangers of underestimating both the complexities of internal politics and the unforeseen consequences of foreign invasion. The Aztec Empire was not just a casualty of war, it was a victim of its own internal contradictions and the inability of its leadership to adapt to the rapidly changing tides of history. Moctezuma's failure to fully understand the nature of the Spanish threat and his inability to inspire the unity needed to confront it sealed the empire's fate. The fall of the Aztec Empire serves as a poignant reminder that even the greatest empires, when divided or complacent, can be brought to their knees by those who are determined enough to challenge them. In the end, the Aztec Empire did not merely fall because of a foreign invasion. It fell because of the convergence of many factors: missteps in leadership, internal strife, overextension, and the devastating effects of disease. While the empire was ultimately destroyed, the memory of its glory lives on. The ruins of Tenochtitlan still stand as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the Aztec people, while their descendants continue to honor their cultural legacy. The Aztec Empire, a vibrant and sophisticated civilization, was a monument to the genius of its people. With its capital at Tenochtitlan, situated on a series of islands in Lake Texcoco, the Aztecs had developed an advanced society with deep traditions in art, science, and spirituality. Their understanding of agriculture, particularly their use of chinampas, man-made islands used for farming, allowed them to sustain large populations, while their grand temples and pyramids were testimony to their profound belief system and political power. But all of this, like the towering stone monuments they built, would eventually crumble under the weight of foreign invasion, disease, and internal disunity. Moctezuma Seku, the emperor at the time of the Spanish arrival, is often seen as a tragic figure. As the leader of an empire at the height of its power, he found himself caught between a world of ancient prophecies and the reality of a rapidly changing world. The arrival of Cortés and his men seemed, at first, to be the fulfillment of the prophecy that Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, would return from across the ocean. This belief, deeply rooted in Aztec culture, led Moctezuma to view the Spanish invaders not as enemies, but as divine figures. It was this fateful misconception that would contribute to his inability to effectively respond to the threat posed by the Spanish. Initially, Cortés and his men were welcomed into Tenochtitlan, and the Aztec emperor, confused by the strange appearance and claims of the Spaniards, provided them with gifts and hospitality. However, Cortés had no intention of offering anything but conflict. Using the divine reverence bestowed upon him, he was able to manipulate Moctezuma into submission, even taking the emperor hostage in his own palace. Moctezuma's captivity was symbolic of the broader erosion of Aztec power. Once seen as invincible and godlike, the emperor now languished under the control of foreign forces. As the situation grew more dire for the Aztecs, internal divisions began to surface. The empire had, for years, relied on a complex web of alliances with other indigenous groups. Some of these alliances were based on mutual benefit, but many others were born out of coercion and fear. Over time, the Aztecs had made enemies among neighboring tribes, and their rule was often resented. The Spaniards, with their promise of freedom from Aztec oppression, found willing allies in groups such as the Tlaxcalans, who had long been oppressed by the Aztecs. These alliances provided Cortés with the manpower and resources needed to wage war against the Aztec Empire. Meanwhile, the Spaniards' possession of advanced weaponry, including firearms, steel swords, and horses, allowed them to gain the upper hand in battle. The psychological impact of the arrival of the Spanish, who seemed to emerge as if from a dream, added to the confusion and fear of the Aztec people. But it was not just the weaponry that gave the Spaniards an advantage. The spread of diseases such as smallpox proved to be even more devastating than the battles themselves. The Aztecs had no immunity to these diseases, and the mortality rate was staggering. It is estimated that smallpox killed more Aztecs than the Spanish weapons ever could. Entire communities were decimated, and the already weakened empire found itself in a dire situation. Despite the catastrophic spread of disease, Moctezuma continued to attempt diplomacy, offering tribute and attempting to appease the Spanish. However, his actions were increasingly seen as a sign of weakness, both by his own people and by Cortés. Moctezuma's failure to unite his people and command their loyalty ultimately led to his downfall. His hesitation to decisively confront the Spanish invaders and his attempts at negotiation were interpreted as signs of indecisiveness. As a result, the Aztec capital, once bustling with grandeur, began to fall into chaos. The turning point came in 1520 with the death of Moctezuma. Accounts of his death vary. Some say that he was struck down by the Spanish after attempting to pacify his people, while others suggest that he was killed by his own subjects, angry at his inability to protect them. Regardless of the manner of his death, it was clear that the empire was now leaderless and fractured. In the wake of his death, the Spanish and their indigenous allies launched a full-scale assault on Tenochtitlan. The siege of Tenochtitlan, which began in earnest in 1521, was one of the most devastating campaigns in history. Cortés and his men laid siege to the city, cutting off supplies and causing the Aztecs to starve. The once proud capital was reduced to a shell of its former self as the people struggled to survive. Despite the Aztecs' resistance, they could not overcome the superior tactics and firepower of the Spanish. The walls of Tenochtitlan, which had once stood as a monument to Aztec ingenuity and power, now became a tomb for the empire. Yet, as the Spanish pressed on, the Aztecs' most powerful weapon against them, their own people, began to crumble. Disease had ravaged the population, and hunger took its toll. Even the mighty warriors of the Aztec Empire, trained in the art of warfare from a young age, were no match for the devastation brought on by the Spanish forces. Cortés, ever patient and calculating, knew that time was on his side. The longer the siege went on, the more the Aztecs weakened, until eventually, the city could no longer sustain its inhabitants. On August 13, 1521, after months of relentless siege, Tenochtitlan fell. The great city, once a jewel of the Americas, was reduced to ruins. The Aztec Empire, which had dominated Mesoamerica for centuries, was no more. Cortés had achieved his goal, but at a heavy cost. The conquest of the Aztec Empire was not just a military victory. It marked the beginning of a new era in the Americas, one that would see the rise of European colonial powers and the eventual annihilation of many indigenous cultures. With the fall of Tenochtitlan, the Spanish began the long process of colonization. They tore down the old temples and pyramids of the Aztecs, replacing them with churches and colonial buildings. The city of Tenochtitlan, now Mexico City, became the center of Spanish control in the Americas. The Aztec people, many of whom had been subjected to brutal treatment under their own rulers, now faced a new form of oppression under the Spanish. Yet, despite this, the legacy of the Aztec civilization lived on. The destruction of the Aztec Empire was not just the fall of a city, it was the collapse of a way of life. The Aztecs, with their complex society and rich culture, were forever altered by the invasion. But the spirit of the Aztec people lived on in their descendants, who blended their ancient traditions with the new world that had been imposed upon them. The legacy of the Aztecs is visible today in Mexican culture, from the art and architecture to the language and rituals. The fall of the Aztec Empire serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of even the mightiest civilizations. It illustrates how even the most advanced and powerful empires can be brought to their knees by internal strife, foreign invasion, and unforeseen external forces. The Aztecs, with all their grandeur and power, were ultimately undone by a series of miscalculations, miscommunications, and a failure to adapt to the rapidly changing world around them. In the end, the fall of the Aztec Empire was not just a military defeat. It was the tragic end of an era. The fall of the Aztec Empire is more than a moment in history. It is the crucible in which the future of the Americas was forged. The story of this empire's destruction is steeped in the fire of conquest, the frost of disease, and the echoes of a clash between two worlds. One ancient, mystical, and proud. The other young, hungry, and full of ambition. When the world as the Aztecs knew it crumbled, it was not merely the end of an empire, but the death of a vision, a culture, and a way of life. The sun set on a civilization that had flourished at the peak of its power, and in the ensuing darkness, the conquerors left their mark on the land. The rise of the Aztec Empire was swift and impressive. With Tenochtitlan as its heart, a city built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, the empire spread its influence across vast territories. Empire to thrive. Their culture, deeply rooted in religion, art, and tradition, was both a reflection of their incredible achievements and a reminder of tributary states, many of whom were unhappy under Aztec rule. These groups, often forced into submission through violence and coercion, would later become the very allies that would contribute to the empire's undoing. The arrival of Hernán Cortés in 1519 marked the beginning of the Aztecs' tragic descent. Cortés, a Spanish conquistador driven by the promise of gold and glory, landed on the eastern shores of Mexico with a small army. At first, the Aztecs viewed the Spaniards with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Moctezuma II, the Aztec emperor, had heard strange prophecies of beings coming from the east, beings with the appearance of gods. When Cortés and his men arrived, the emperor, consumed by fear and belief in his people's ancient omens, welcomed the conquistadors, believing them to be the long-awaited return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. This misconception would prove to be fatal. Cortés, ever the manipulator, used this belief to his advantage. He demanded gifts, parlayed with Moctezuma, and insinuated himself into the heart of the Aztec Empire. The emperor, uncertain of the threat the Spaniards posed, hesitated to act. What followed was a series of political miscalculations by Moctezuma that allowed Cortés to gain a foothold in Tenochtitlan. For a time, the Aztecs, who had once ruled with unchallenged authority, seemed to lose their grip on power. Moctezuma's failure to confront the invaders, his inability to unify his people in the face of a growing threat, sealed the empire's fate. His decisions were seen by many as signs of weakness, and this failure to inspire unity would lead to the unraveling of the empire he had worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, Cortés, a man driven not by diplomacy but by conquest, continued to gather support from indigenous groups, resentful of Aztec rule. The Tlaxcalans, long oppressed by the Aztecs, allied with the Spaniards, bringing with them their warriors and knowledge of the land. Cortés now had both the resources to fight and the military advantage of firearms, steel weapons, and horses, technologies that the Aztecs had never encountered. But it wasn't just the Spanish weapons that gave them the edge. The arrival of disease, specifically smallpox, was an unseen, unstoppable force. The Spanish unknowingly brought with them diseases to which the Aztecs had no immunity. The Aztec population began to dwindle rapidly, their numbers decimated by the invisible enemy that spread through the empire like wildfire. Despite the devastation caused by disease, the Aztecs did not immediately yield. The empire fought back with the resilience born of centuries of military conquest, but but the combination of internal strife, disunity, and the deadly plague slowly turned the tide against them. Moctezuma, still captive to the whims of Cortes, found himself at the mercy of his people, who had grown disillusioned with his leadership. The emperor's failure to rally his people and expel the invaders left him vulnerable, a man caught between the gods and the future. In the year 1520, the Aztec Empire suffered a brutal blow. Moctezuma, in an attempt to calm the growing unrest among his people, was taken captive by Cortes. The emperor, once seen as a god, was now a prisoner. His authority shattered. This act was both a symbolic and literal death blow to the Aztec Empire. The people of Tenochtitlan, in a desperate and enraged uprising, attacked the Spanish forces. In the ensuing chaos, the Spaniards were forced to retreat in what became known as La Noche Triste, or the Sad Night. It was a brief moment of triumph for the Aztecs, but it would prove to be fleeting. The retreat of the Spaniards was not the end. Cortes, determined to claim victory, returned to Tenochtitlan in 1521 with reinforcements. The second siege of the city began. This time, the Aztecs were already weakened by disease, internal divisions, and the loss of their leader. The city, once a symbol of Aztec power and ingenuity, was now a battlefield. The siege lasted for months, and the people of Tenochtitlan, starving and thirsty, could not hold out forever. Cortes and his men systematically destroyed the city's aqueducts and bridges, cutting off the vital lifeblood of the metropolis. The once great city now stood on the precipice of death, its inhabitants dying not just from starvation, but from the continued spread of smallpox. On August to rubble, the mighty Aztec Empire, which had once commanded the respect of its neighbors, began the process of rebuilding, but not in the image of the Aztecs. Instead, they constructed Mexico City on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, an act that would forever change the course of history. The grandeur of the Aztec world, with its temples and pyramids, was replaced with Spanish colonial architecture, and the Aztec gods